At 05:49 local time, inside the glass-walled ring of Chabahar's vessel traffic control tower, an Iranian controller is routing the morning's first container ship toward Shahid Beheshti Pier when his radio fills with routine berth chatter. 90 miles out in the Gulf of Oman, he has no idea an American destroyer has just locked 12 coordinates into 12 Tomahawks, and every single one of them is already pointed at his building. At 05:50, a square hatch on the destroyer's forward deck blows off and vents a wall of white smoke across the bow. The first Tomahawk tears out on a pillar of solid rocket fire, pitches toward the coast, and climbs. The crew feels the launch in their sternum before the sound reaches them. The booster burns out and drops away. Short wings kick out of the fuselage. A small turbojet ignites in the tail, and the missile flattens into a steady, unhurried cruise. 11 more follow over the next 4 minutes. Hatch, ignition, climb, tip. Each one bends onto its own compass, heading until the sky above the bow is cross-hatched with thin white contrails. By 05:54, the forward deck is silent again. Out ahead, the lead missile drops to 100 feet. Wave tops blur beneath it at 550 miles per hour. That altitude holds for the next 13 minutes. High overhead, 2 Navy F/A-Day CPCE Super Hornets hold a slow orbit over the Gulf, waiting on a tasking nobody has passed them yet. The Arleigh Burke below them goes quiet and starts its second job, listening. Back at Chabahar, the controller keeps working. A tug backs off the key. A crane horn sounds once over the pier. No one in that glass ring sees 12 gray shapes running under the radar horizon. No one aboard the destroyer says their names aloud. The missiles are gone, and the harbor's morning routine keeps moving straight toward the moment the routine stops. The BGM-109E Tomahawk Block 4 is a 3,500-pound Navy cruise missile built to put a 1,000-pound warhead through a specific point from roughly 1,000 miles away, about the distance from New York to Miami. It cruises at 550 miles per hour, fast enough to cover Washington to Philadelphia in around 15 minutes, and it can be retargeted in flight through a satellite data link. The violence at launch comes from the Mach 106 booster, a solid rocket that burns for 12 seconds at 6,000 pounds of thrust. Its only job is to get the missile clear of the cell before any adjacent hatch opens. From there, the Williams F-107 turbofan takes over and carries the weapon skimming through sea clutter for the long run inland. 11 of the 12 fly a fixed sequence of waypoints between the ship and Chabahar. The 12th flies a loose oval over open water a few miles off the coast and waits. What it is waiting for hasn't happened yet. One by one, the 11 drop below the curve of the Earth and off the destroyer's radar picture. The next radar to pick them up belongs to Iran. Just behind the warhead sits a shoebox-sized navigation package, an inertial measurement unit with a GPS antenna mounted on its back. The inertial system tracks every turn and every acceleration from the moment of launch and calculates a running position estimate. Left alone, that estimate drifts by about a nautical mile per hour. GPS scrubs the error with a fresh position fix every second across the entire transit, like a driver keeping a mental count of turns and miles while a passenger reads every highway sign the instant it appears. Behind a small window in the nose, one more sensor rides along, still dormant. It holds a single photograph. For the next several minutes, neither side can account for these missiles. Then the coast starts looking back. East of the harbor, the crew of an Iranian Murad air defense battery is wrapping up the night watch. Experienced operators, 3 years of drone engagements behind them, coffee still warm. Their Kavos search radar has come up clean all shift. The first contact lands on the Kavos sweep, not at 90 miles out, but at 24, then a second, a third. The crew is out of their seats before that third trace finishes painting. The Kavos antenna sits 50 feet up and can detect a fighter at 90 miles, roughly the distance from New York City to Philadelphia. Against a missile running at wave height, the Earth itself does the hiding. The target only clears the horizon at 24 miles. At Tomahawk speed, that is 160 seconds from first contact to overhead. The entire engagement has to happen inside the length of a pop song. Track lock. 2 missiles off the rail inside a minute. Each booster slaps a pressure wave across the pad hard enough to rock the control cabin. 12 miles off the coast, the lead Zolfaghar missile shreds Tomahawk number 4. The debris barely disturbs the water. The Zolfaghar missiles ride triple rail launchers. The second pair is already slewing east. Zolfaghar is Iran's upgraded Missile interceptor, a rebuilt descendant of the American MIM-23 Hawk. Each roughly 1,400-pound missile runs at around Mach 3 to a range of about 25 miles, carrying a 120-pound fragmentation warhead behind a proximity fuse. It carries no radar of its own. The Kavos gives the bearing. A separate illuminator antenna paints the target, and the seeker chases the reflected beam back to the source. When that beam shifts, the missile goes blind. So the crew swings the illuminator to the next Tomahawk and runs straight into the wall their own hardware builds. Semi-active homing means the radar can only walk 1 missile at a time. Break the lock, rebuild it, fire, guide, repeat. Call it 40 seconds per shot, 1 flashlight, 11 targets, 3 different exit angles. The horizon geometry allows 3 shots before the first survivor is directly overhead, and the survivors aren't scattering at random. Locks that never fully establish. Contacts sliding past the edge of the illuminator's travel arc faster than the mount can chase them. Someone mapped this battery before a single hatch opened. Watch the remaining Tomahawks bend onto their terminal headings and the shape of that map becomes clear. 3 approach corridors, 35 degrees apart, 1 from the open Gulf, 1 from the south, 1 hooking southwest past Konarak, carrying 4 and then 3 missiles at launch, timed so each group of impacts lands in its own 90-second slot, working through the target list in sequence. The illuminator antenna can swing 45 degrees either side before the entire mount has to physically reorient. The battery defends a single wedge of sky. The salvo dropped 3 or 4 missiles inside that wedge and sent the rest down bearings the mount cannot reach in time. The planners did not fire a line at this port. They spread a net. A second battery sits further down the jetty. Bigger radar, faster missile, faster math. It makes its decision, lets the Zolfaghars go, and starts hunting the people who fired the Tomahawks. At 05:59, both Super Hornets over the Gulf pick up the warning tone. Something large just started illuminating them. Not the Murad battery, which is still working through its intercept queue. A different radar, further down the waterfront. And it is not looking for cruise missiles. It is looking for the crews who launched them. The flat, slab-faced antenna on the jetty carries no dish and does not spin. That is the Najm 804, the X-band phased array face of Iran's Khordad 15 air defense system. Instead of a motor turning metal, thousands of small emitters shift their phase timing to steer the beam electronically. It can jump from target to target in milliseconds, hold multiple tracks simultaneously without pausing the scan, and spot a fighter-sized contact at roughly 93 miles. It guides engagements out to 75. A rotating radar is one guard turning his head. A phased array is a row of guards who never turn their heads. Every one of them is already watching you. The beam settles on the lead Hornet. 4 launch canisters sit below that radar, angled up, holding a missile. American engineers designed first. One of those canisters fires. A Sayyad 3 punches out on a spike of exhaust, tips over, and goes supersonic toward the lead Hornet, recalculating its intercept geometry every fraction of a second. The Sayad-3 is Iran's long-range interceptor for the Khordad-15, a roughly 2,200-pound missile descended from the RIM-66 Standard Missile, the U.S. Navy's own fleet defense weapon, rebuilt and turned back on Navy pilots. It runs past Mach 4, carries a 440-pound fragmentation warhead, reaches beyond 70 miles, and can climb to nearly 89,000 feet. But it inherited its parents' hard constraint. The guiding radar cannot look away, and the lead Hornet is about to give it a reason to. The lead Hornet rolls. An AGM-88 harm screams off the wing rail and accelerates past Mach 2. The jet bucks slightly as the missile leaves the pylon. The AGM-88C is an 800-pound anti-radiation missile with a 146-pound blast fragmentation warhead, Mach 2+ speed, and over 30 miles of reach from this firing position. It transmits nothing. Antennas in the nose detect incoming radar pulses arriving fractions of a nanosecond apart. Compare the Najm 804's emission signature against a threat library and steer toward the transmitter. It does not look at you. It homes in on the sound of your own voice. Two missiles are crossing in the air simultaneously. The Sayad-3 climbing toward the Hornet, the Harm diving toward the radar guiding it. Both depend on the same single transmitter. Whoever controls the next 4 seconds controls both outcomes. 100 yards down the jetty, a Qadir launch crew is making the oldest calculation in coastal defense. No orders coming through the net. Impacts walking up the waterfront toward them. They cannot stop what is inbound, but they know exactly which patch of ocean it came from, and their missile has the legs to reach it. At 0601, they run a bearing straight back along the Tomahawk approach tracks and empty the launcher. 2 rounds off the truck and out over the swells. The destroyer that fired the opening shot of this engagement just became a target. Back at the phased array, the battery crew chief is running the only math that matters. Keep transmitting, and the Sayad-3 probably takes the Hornet, but the Harm certainly takes the cabin and everyone in it. So he makes the correct, brutal call, the one his doctrine wrote for exactly this scenario. He shuts the transmitter down. The array goes dark. The Harm holds its last bearing for a few seconds and finds nothing left to home on. It spends itself into the harbor water a few hundred yards from the silent antenna. The Sayad-3, now several miles out, tears past the lead Hornet's canopy, close enough that the pilot feels it through the airframe. Look at that dark, silent array, because everything that just happened came out of it. A Harm carries no map coordinate of its target. When the emissions stop, the seeker holds a bearing that goes stale by the second, smearing the radar into a few hundred yards of empty jetty and water. That same silence killed the Sayad-3. Semi-active homing, the light it was tracking just switched off. It flew its final 3 miles unguided, arriving at the point where the Hornet used to be. A Hornet crossing at 500 knots in a hard descending turn covers hundreds of yards during those seconds. The crew chief traded his shot to preserve his radar. The pilot's geometry gave the missile an equation with no answer. Both American pilots are alive. Both radars on the jetty are still standing. One American missile has been orbiting the Gulf this entire time, waiting for exactly this stalemate. Silence protects the crew chief's radar, but it also makes that array useless. To guide the next Sayad-3, the Najm 804 has to transmit again. He knows what 3 years of drone war taught every Iranian radar crew about illuminators that stay up too long. At 0607, he brings the array back up anyway. 60 seconds later, the 12th Tomahawk pulls out of its holding pattern and buries itself in the radar position on the jetty. Nobody at that battery ever saw the order that sent it. That 12th Tomahawk, back when it was still carving circles over the water, was the Block 4, the variant engineered to change its aim point in flight. It carries a two-way satellite data link running at a few kilobits per second, enough to receive fresh coordinates, enough to send back a status report. And it had fuel to loiter for 2 full hours, waiting for someone to hand it a reason to commit. The chain that closed it ran in under a minute. The moment the Najm 804 came back up, receivers on both Hornets and the destroyer compared bearings and arrival time differences, pinned the position in seconds, and the strike cell pushed fresh coordinates through the satellite uplink. The loitering missile loaded the new waypoint and turned toward the coast. A radar that needs sustained transmission to guide its own missiles gave away its address in the first 2 seconds of being back on the air. But the 2 missiles that left the jetty truck at 0601 need no further instructions. They have spent every one of these minutes skimming toward the destroyer. The Qadir box launchers sit angled out to sea on a truck bed. Iran's stretched anti-ship cruise missile, developed from the Noor, which itself traces back to the Chinese C-802. Each roughly 1,600-pound missile uses a solid booster to leave the truck before a small turbojet takes over. It cruises just under the speed of sound, around 650 miles per hour, with a 440-pound semi-armor-piercing warhead, and a claimed range of about 124 miles. None of those numbers are the dangerous part. The danger is the altitude. Around 25 miles out, the missile descends to 10 feet above the swells. Around 12 miles, an active radar seeker powers up and locks onto the largest radar return on the water. A destroyer's mast stands 65 feet above the sea. A target running 10 feet over the surface clears the ship's horizon at 16 miles, which at Qadir speed gives 88 seconds from first detection to impact. Subtract 8 to 10 seconds for the combat system to confirm the contact is a sea-skimmer and not wave clutter. The ship has under 80 seconds to generate a fire solution, launch interceptors, and hit the missiles before a delayed action fuse lets the warhead through the hull plating and detonates inside a machinery space. A knife slid flat across the floor under the furniture. At 0604, the next Tomahawk on the target list erases the launch truck. 3 minutes too late. The 2 missiles it already fired are still running. Hugging the wave tops is one way to attack a warship. Iran's second missile takes the opposite approach. From a dispersed inland site, a 4.5-ton missile stands up and claws into the morning on a dense white plume. That signature belongs to the Zolfaghar Basir, not a cruise missile, an anti-ship ballistic missile. It climbs first, then falls onto the ship from the edge of the atmosphere. The Fateh family weapon uses a single-stage solid rocket, reaches out to roughly 435 miles, and carries around 1,100 to 1,300 pounds of warhead. In the terminal dive, it arrives past Mach 4, while an electro-optical seeker opens in the final seconds and matches the ship's silhouette against the surrounding water. The teeth of this launch are in the timing. The crew released it behind the slower Qadirs on purpose, so all 3 missiles converge on the destroyer inside the same 60-second window. 2 threats below the radar horizon, one arriving from well above it. One aimed at the rib cage, one at the jaw, time to land together. 2 of them, the destroyer's own radar has never put a beam on. In the destroyer's Combat Information Center, the crew already has the firing sequence worked out, and it comes from math, not instinct. A solid fuel ballistic trajectory is governed by gravity and drag, so the computers solved the Zolfaghar intercept before the warhead even tipped over. A 15-second window, 25 miles up. The Qadirs are the inverse problem. Invisible until the horizon, but once they appear, the ship's interceptors can cover that distance in roughly 20 seconds. Take the threats in the wrong order, and the ship is chasing sea-skimmers, while half a ton of warhead drops through uncontested. Sequence them correctly, and a coordinated strike built to saturate the defenses becomes 3 problems in a row. At 0608, a cell on the forward deck fires, and the first SM-6 climbs hard enough to rattle the deck plates. Seconds later, it tears the falling Zolfaghar warhead apart. A debris cloud where a ton of incoming used to be. No other navy makes that catch. This crew makes it look routine. The grid of square hatches forward of the bridge is where the answer came from and where the next rounds are about to come from. The SM-6 is the Navy's long-range interceptor with its own active radar seeker in the nose. Descended from the AMRAAM air-to-air missile, it runs in the Mach 3.5 range, reaches past 150 miles, and carries a 140-pound fragmentation warhead. What it does not require is the ship's own radar. 2 more SM-6s leave the vertical launch cells, aimed at a section of scope showing nothing at all. They meet the pair of Qadir's seconds after both missiles crest the horizon and drive them both into the sea. The last splash lands at 0610. The 60-second window Iran engineered has produced nothing. Only then does the mechanism become clear. The 2 Hornets overhead held radar tracks on both Qadir's the entire inbound run, minutes of orbiting with their radars transmitting over a coastline that had already sent a Syad-3 past one of their canopies minutes earlier. Every sweep was an invitation. They had the fuel and the clearance to pull back over open water. They stayed, because the destroyer could not see below its own horizon and they could. Their tracks went straight into the ship's combat system over Link 16. Each SM-6 used that external track to cover the long leg. Then its own active seeker took over in the terminal phase, pinging into the sea clutter and listening for the Qadir's echo. The Navy calls it launch on remote, and it is the entire logic behind a networked American fleet. Any sensor, any shooter, one shared picture. Your partner points you at a doorframe in a dark room. Your hand finds the last inch. The F/A-18E Super Hornet is still turning circles over that coastline. It never fired a shot at either Qadir. It is a twin-engine strike fighter, about 60 feet of aircraft, roughly 32,000 pounds empty, capable of exceeding Mach 1.8 and hauling over 8 tons of fuel and weapons across 11 hardpoints. What mattered this morning is the APG-79 radar in the nose, an electronically scanned array that maps the sea surface, holds a wave-skimming missile in its beam, and passes that track to a warship over the data link without breaking the scan for even a moment. That is the whole mechanism. The destroyer had the weapons. The Hornets had the eyes. 2 pilots kept those eyes on a coastline that had already thrown a surface-to-air missile past one of their canopies. 8 minutes of making themselves visible to anyone still listening, so a warship 90 miles back could engage something it would never see. The country bought a lot of expensive hardware that morning. The bravest thing in the air was a decision. Between 0608 and 0610, the Pier strikes are landing. The gun emplacements at the naval end of the Shahid Beheshti, the missile bunkers behind the Shahid Kalantari, the Murad battery east of the harbor, still cycling its illuminator when its grid square came up. Columns of concrete and smoke climb over the military corners of the waterfront. Nowhere else. Strike planners call it time on target. Every hit on one coordinated clock. That clock has 1 tick left, 1 missile remaining. And it is not aimed at the tower. It is aimed at a photograph of the tower. The difference comes down to a matter of feet. The controller from 0549 cleared the building several minutes ago. On the far shore, a camera is already recording. At 0612, 23 minutes after the destroyer first came into the wind, the final Tomahawk punches through the glass ring of Chabahar's vessel traffic control tower and detonates inside it. Exactly the frame the world will replay through lunch. The smoke column rises over the harbor in full morning light. The container cranes at Shahid Beheshti sit untouched behind it, already waiting for the next ship. The port Iran built to keep working if the Strait of Hormuz ever closed is still operational. Everyone who calls there now knows it works, because Washington decided to leave it working. The next move belongs to Tehran. Rebuild the launchers on that jetty and invite the 13th missile, or let Iran's last open outlet to the ocean stay exactly what it claims to be, just a port.